standing by the banks of the Danube River. No, I'm not. I'm in Ohio. And this video is going to be a long one and a fun one. Brrr. So we got a van that was towed to, well, that we towed in with a seized engine. And the question at hand was, did the engine, what took this engine out and then put a new engine in it? Because, you know, it's a van. It's got to go do vanny things. So anyway, so the first part of this video is going to be the forensics on figuring out what made this engine blow up, at which point I'll stop and have a conclusion about that, and then we shall commence with the engine swap part. It's not complete, this video, but there's a couple of interesting things along the way. You may learn something, or you may just fritter away the hours listening to my monotonous drone, which is fine. I like to think I'm helping to put a few people to sleep out there in the world, and that's part of my mission. What else is to know? At the very end, there'll be a little bit of hot cat content, because I got to do something with that. All right, let's get on it, shall we? So the story is, it did sit for quite some time with the upper intake off, but the shop that had it before us, who shall remain nameless even though they're a dealer, determined that they weren't going to warranty this engine because there was water in the engine, and they're were saying that that's not part of normal operation. I don't know what the hell the deal was. It doesn't matter. I leave others to do that. But we figured out why, or at least some of why it blew up. And then shall begins the swap. So here you go. Okay, this is how the van first arrived to us. Partially disassembled, but not completely. So they've got the upper intake off. This is wet, and it's possibly wet from there, but that shouldn't really cause any major problems. Let's take a look here. And I think I'm gonna have to bust out my mirror for this. Oh boy. All right, let's be able to, yeah, that does not please me. I see corrosion. I see standing water. I see there. Now on this side, which is easier to see, of course, what's going on with the lip of that? It's like the plastic melted. Under the van, the goal here will be to attempt to determine if there's water at the bottom of the pan or not. I've already cracked this loose. It's not that I have superhuman strength, which I actually do, oddly enough. Maybe not. If the engine filled with water, the water would make its way over time to the bottom of the pan because oil floats on water in its full splendor. Okay, that is oil. That is definitely not water. Okay, that's good news. I would expect 5 some odd quarts to come out. That has not been exposed to water. Okay, let's see if she turns. Wow! It's fucking locked. Is not hydrolocked. Was not filled with water, and I know that, at least the initial failure, because I can't spin it in either direction. If a cylinder was filled with water, I would be able to not spin it clockwise, which is the direction of firing, but I would be able to spin it in the opposite direction. You know, this, kids, is the oil that came out. This is I would argue that if that has water in it, it does not have excessive water. All right, 2 of these cylinders, because they fire in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These pairs do have standing water in them. I'm going to blow that out just so I don't have to deal with it, because I'm not going to crank the engine because I realize I've taken the oil out of it, but I'm going to crank it by hand. Here's where I get a face full. Witness the bukkake film. Same story here. Well, you can see water in there. I imagine you'll see the same thing here. Yeah, some. But what I don't see is gonna leak gas when I do this. Oh, well then. See that? How that's all melted? All 6. That is melted plastic. And you can see that the gasket is deformed as well. So that's very interesting. All 6 runners are deformed, as is the bottom of that. And this whole surface here outside of the gasket is also melted. Fascinating. You can see literally melty, melty. Okay, on a whim, I went ahead and pulled out one of the cam position sensors just to get a look at, see if I see any evidence of excessive heat in the valve cover without pulling the whole valve cover out. And I don't see offhand, I know it's hard for me to do this, but I don't see offhand any evidence of heat, but I did. But then I looked more closely. This is the cam position sensor. That is not supposed to look like that. Okay, this is a Virgin or a normal relatively low miles cam position sensor as it sits in the head. And this is its buddy that came out of the engine. And you can see what's going on here. It's like this. It is all melty, melty. All right, I'm back. So what have we learned? Well, we learned a few things. As you can see, this engine water was a secondary problem, which wasn't in the engine itself. The water had gotten into those 2 cylinders just because it sat with the intake off of it. What took this engine out was overheating. Now the question is, why did it overheat? It's something I don't know at the time I'm making this video. I don't know why it overheated. I could take some educated guesses. Most of them involve coolant leaks of some kind and continuing to drive once, not paying attention. I surmise that the engine, to a large extent, will protect itself when it starts to overheat. It'll reduce power, and at a certain point, it'll stop running. The question is, will you notice that it's overheating in time for it not to do permanent damage? This engine, obviously, permanent damage is the damn thing was locked up. Although it may not have been locked up once the intake was taken off, and then the water gets in, and that's what locked it up, because I assume what locked it up was the ring ridge seizing the pistons in their bores, and that we must have broken that free, because once I broke it free, it does more or less spin. Would you want to reuse this engine? The answer is a pretty resounding no. The reason the melty plastic parts you saw are where they are is because those parts were touching either the head or the engine or something like that, the top of the block or the cylinder head. That cam position sensor, the part that's melted is the part that literally screws into the cylinder head. So the cylinder head got very hot. Now, it probably has a bad head gasket as well, because once the aluminum gets that hot, it becomes soft and it warps, and then you're just done. You could spend thousands of dollars trying to mend an overheated engine, where the better solution is just replace it, since they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere, and they're cheap. And that would be the takeaway. I suppose there are cases where you would want to reuse that engine, in which case you take it out and you take it to a machine shop, and they would deck the head, and they would surface the cylinder heads to make sure that's flat, and they would measure everything and correct any cam geometry and all this stuff. But these are not things that you would invest in an engine that's only less than $2,000 to get a good one. You would just replace it. And there, like I say, my local junkyard has 50 of them. They'll put 50 of them on a truck and send them to me for that price. So if I go further with this, I have the engine out, I'm going to save it, and if it becomes important, I can take it apart, and I may be able to determine why it grenaded. And I'm also hopeful and cognizant that, let's say what took it out was a coolant leak somewhere. We're going to be very conscious of that one now that the new engine is in, which you'll see here in a minute. When we started, we're going to do a lot of testing on this one because I don't want to let it go and then 1,000 miles down the road it overheats that engine because it has something simple like a hose with a leak in it or something like that, or a hole in the radiator, some shit like that. So I'll be very wary of that. The engine that's going in there, which you see is a relatively quite a low miles unit, actually came from a Promaster, which is somewhat rare. And in it goes. And what else is there to know? I don't know. Maybe I'll do a follow-up on this video once I find out what actually took that engine apart. I may do what we did in the previous video where I get Boy Wonder and we tear apart an engine and do the forensics and see if we can find any telltale as to why it overheated. There may be clues inside it. I don't know. Or we may just say, I don't know what caused it to overheat, but I know that's what took it off the road. All right, let's get on with this goddamn shit. Okay, well, we're in a quandary here because this engine is locked up solid. She's a solid, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing because she's also junk. Although she's reman, you can tell by this sticker, unless this, it's a sticker. There's another one on the transmission, so the trans is reman too, and I knew that about this, knowing its history. However, the problem is, the engine is locked up, which means it won't turn over, which means I can't get the 4 bolts that hold the flex plate to the torque converter out because I can't rotate the engine. Now I can get to some of them. Can you see any of them in there? No, with the starter out of the way. Boy, that's awful rusty. That's very interesting. Normally we get to them from the bottom and then we rotate 90 degrees and we get all 4 of them. But without being able to rotate the engine, how are we going to separate the engine and the transmission? And the answer is probably, I don't know yet because we haven't done it. But in the past, what you would do is bring the engine out this way and it's going to drag the torque converter with it. The torque converter will release off the spline of the input shaft of the transmission, and that clearance, which isn't much, looks like about, when all's said and done, maybe 3 inches at the most. And I can be the first to tell you how important those 3 inches can be when you only have 3 to work with, will be enough to draw the torque converter out to where I will be able to get to the flex plate, or to the bolts that hold the flex plate to the torque converter like that. Is that making sense what I'm saying? I'm saying you're going to be pulling it out, and instead of getting it to it through the access holes in the transmission, you're going to get to it from externally, from between that gap that opens up. All right, after much sweat, we tried something. I tried driving a thing to move the top of the piston number 2 here with a chisel that basically looks like that. And of course we got the chisel stuck in there and the magnet won't get it out. However, machoing it with the man bar here has got it to move a little. Go ahead. So we're trying to go in reverse. Yes. Just a little bit more for Daddy. I might be able to come up with something. Okay, all right, so what we've worked out, we got it to break free, more or less. Paul is rotating it counterclockwise. Go ahead, young man. He is worrying through the starter opening at the ring gear. And as he's doing that, this is coming around. You know, it's 2023 and we're still turning bolts like cavemen, like Neanderthals. We stopped hitting women over the head, though. That's something. All right. Cool. Yeah, come here, I'll belch. All right. Now, I believe what seized this engine up, which is going to be a different video, I think. I know it overheated massively, but I think it had water sat in it after the overheat and rusted the rings to the cylinder walls, because now that we've broken it free, it's spinning not exactly normally, but pretty close. It's dripping all the Marvel mystery oil into my face that we let it soak overnight to try and bust those rings loose. But what really busted them loose was just going apeshit. When in doubt, more force, bigger bar, more heat. Someday, I'll fix enough vans where I can hire a lackey who will call me, and I'll have him, and I'll call him Jetson. Jetson, get in here and videotape. Jetson, turn that wrench. It is my personal goal to have an assistant named Jetson who I bark out nonsensical orders to. Jetson, collate these. Collate what, sir? Don't ask questions, Jetson. Just get on it. Jetson, running up the flagpole and see who salutes it. But sir, we don't have a flagpole. None of your sass, Jetson. Fine, all right. We have achieved 4 bolts out of the thing, and success, great victory, huzzah, and there was much rejoicing. Okay, well, this was a success. I didn't film it because I'm lazy and I need both hands. Someday I'll get a chest mount. Anyway, that's the overheated engine that came out. This here is the new engine that's going in, and there it is with no engine in it. By the way, you hippies, you can do this whatever the fuck way you want, but this is the way to do it correctly. Get the paper bags for your sandwiches, cat bolts, starter bolts, and organize your bolts like that unless you want to get real fancy with some kind of tray. But make it like this so you can label them so you don't spend all day looking for fucking bolts. I hate that. All right, kiddies, well, here I am in voiceover. This section, as you can see, is sped up because it's just not all that interesting. There's a fat guy in the frame putting a motor in. That's exciting. The general gist of it, I suppose I should make a video for people specifically doing engine swaps just to show them all the ins and outs. But the guts of it is that there's 2 pins that locate the engine to the transmission, 2 machine dowel pins. And once you get those 2 on, then the thing just kind of falls together. And you can use the bell housing bolts to draw it together. You'll see us here in this video jockeying the engine around and jockeying the transmission around to try and get those 2 pins to line up with, there's a little separator plate that goes between the transmission and the engine as well. So I guess it's not that exciting, and frankly it's no different than doing an engine swap in 1938. They've been the same forever. It's just sideways in a front wheel drive vehicle. You'll also find that you have to pick the engine up quite close to the cherry picker boom, because otherwise the cherry picker will crash into either those air conditioning lines that you see there or the top of the van or the firewall. It takes some whim-wham. We use a chain off of that little loop thing by the oil filter that goes into one of the bolts in the back of the head. Sometimes we pick it up from one bolt, sometimes from the other. Doesn't really matter. And maybe you can see in this shot we've got a transmission jack under the transmission just to get it level so the engine will be level to it. And the only real thing to know is that you got to be careful of the belt side of the engine crashing into the air conditioning lines. Well, that's that. I'm going to spare you the rest of the details because it's just not very exciting. Save it for another time. And let's conclude. All right, so that concludes that. You've learned a lot. You've seen an engine go in and out. You've seen two deeply stupid guys trying to figure out how to get an engine out that won't turn. Luckily, we got lucky. Could have been much worse. Taking the transmission out, even in that position when the engine's already out, is still a lot of bolts and a lot of sweating and cursing and struggling and grunting and sexual jokes at the expense of your family members. As I say, I may do a follow-up video on this if there's more to say. There may not be, but I'd like to thank you for wasting a lot of time. And now, as promised, cat content. A short amount of cat content.